How's it going, everyone? Welcome, Oliver Gonzalez, again. So, let's continue to look at the exploration of how to send data using the browsers, particularly on our HTML documents with the HTML form. So, why am I doing this? Well, as I mentioned in previous videos that are related to the React and part of the behaviors that when you're developing applications like static websites or blogs posts or more interactive apps like trading apps or gamings or real-time applications or even in the service applications like back office apps, SaaS, right? In all of those cases, at the end of the day, you will need to, at some point, exchange data to another computer, aka with a server. So I just want to make quick explorations of how do I get here as a way to make sense of this and be able to describe that. And if I have to explain not only to myself but to somebody else, I can do that in the most effective way possible by also quoting the source. So don't take my word for granted. Thanks to all the heavy lifting and efforts done by a lot of people that make possible of these standards to live here. So in those cases, so standards like the HTTP, the HTML, the DOM, and in terms of fetching data is, well, how do you do that with HTML forms? Reading about the spec, understanding is a three-step involved in sending data using HTML form, which is defining the UI. Now defining is the server processing and connecting the client UI with the server. So in the past video, I did how to create a basic templates. In our case, with this Pixar ordering form, right? Ignore the hello world. This is not part of that. But it says, right? Is hey, this is how you can build this. And in the docs, we went through describing each one of those particular um, input or way to construct this form. So you wrap them into a paragraph, which is a grouping content, and then you started to define is the label that wraps now is the input. Okay, so the styling is at this moment is defined by the browser settings or the browsers the browser settings. You can also put it as text or as a telephone or as an email. How you can run some validations behind the scenes by actually exploring at how to do this kind of validations, right? Especially when you have to identify several tokens in a stream, how you can run that, all right? Whether it's you identify each one of them per operations, and then you combine that to get the proper validation, or you just putting into this collection as a bucket, one next to each other, and anytime that you iterate through these elements or through these collections, I want you to verify these predicates. Or in other words, if this actually is true or false, right? And this is also another way of how you can actually run some validations at scale. This is good for readability. This is good for scaling, right? And also how to work, for example, is with other type of inputs like radio buttons, especially when you want to pick only one. In our case, the pixel size. So small, medium, and large, right? And how you do that? So by wrapping this group of radio buttons into a field set and describe this as a legend, and each one of those elements wrap them into a paragraph, this grouping HTML elements, and define is the input, the type check radio, as well as the content or the label here. So when you click on the label, it actually now mapped to that. And in order to achieve this behavior, you need is to indicate to your element. Did I close that? Pro essential to be born. Okay. You need to indicate is the name of that, right? So when you wrap the things into a paragraph, it actually achieves these behaviors behind the scenes. So that's great, right? And the same for pixel topping. And in this case, because you want to select multiple, it doesn't matter if you wrap them into, or if you put names to this group, right? When it comes to work with times, right? Particularly here is just working with hours and minutes, right? Which is gonna give you this particular string. Or if you are now, if you want to work with daytime locale, which is a type of input, which is more explicit about this. Okay, is say, hey, this is how you can do, tiki, right? And this will give you now is a format as an ISO. What is the name of the format? Is there this one? This one is the ISO 8601. So this is a standard way of how you can now represent dates and times in this worldwide communications, right? Particularly here, it doesn't return is the time zone, which is quite, in some cases, you might need to get that. Let me see if it's the format used here on the wire, daytime and numbers, right? In the pixel delivery example, the times are specified in the format of this 2 digits. In some locales, however, times are often expressed differently when present to users. For example, like this. Similar issues exist with dates, with added complication that even the order of component is not always consistency. For example, in Cyprus, the 1st February in 2003 will typically be reading like this as the Europe, okay, or in the Latin America, while the same day in Japan will typically be reading as this. You know, the year, okay, the year, the day, the month, and the day, and even with numbers, where locals differ. For example, in what punctuation is used as a decimal separator and the thousand separators. It is therefore important to distinguish the time, date, numbers format using HTML and info submissions, which are always the formats defined in this specification that is established by the ISO here. For computer readable date and time formats, from the time, date, and number format presents to the user by the browser and are set as input from the user by the browser. The format used on the wire is here, and the time and day numbers given by the page in the wire format is then translated to the user preferred presentations here. This allows scripting page on a server to process time, dates, and numbers in a consistent manner without needing to support dozens of different formats, while still supporting the user needs. However, if we look at this, of the implementation nodes, which I think is quite the same here, right? The format shown to the user in date, time, and numbers control is independent of the format used for form submissions. Browsers are encouraged to use a user interface that presents date, times, and number according to the conventions of either the local implied the inputs element language for that. So for example, it will be confusing to user if American English page claims that the Cirque du Soleil show was going to be shown in 2-3. But the browser is configured to use British English local to show date of 3-2 in the ticket purchase date picker, right? There is still a risk that the user will end up arriving a month late, of course, but there's only so much we can do about the different cultures. Again, it's just to try to make sense of how do we now deal with the time across worldwide communications. So the thing here is that when you use those kind of formats here, like daytime locale, right? As you can see here, right? So daytime locale here is gonna give in a format that is it doesn't have any time zone, right? So this is something that goes beyond of today's topics, and I know, but it's important to understand. You may wonder, is like, how do you now try to convert this into a time zone? That's a good question. So we can say something like, hey, if this is a valid date that I'm gonna pass to you, right? I need to somehow you give me is the internationalizations of that. Sorry, this log cannot be shown. This might need use a browser console instead. All right, no problem. So let's get into this. Oh, that's interesting. That's interesting. Okay. So let's go here. Okay. And here do something like this. So let me now run this. Say, hey, this is a new date that I'm gonna give you as an string. Okay, which is this. And now I do have access is to the time zone here, right? So the time locale doesn't give you is the value, it give you the time local for that moment, which might be good, all right, might be what you want. But when you wrap that into an object that describes this worldwide communications using this standard, it actually makes sense for you can now process that at the server. You can understand it's a different component of the date. So next is the delivery instructions, all right? So text content area, so on and so forth. But this is quite a very basic form. And most of the time, the thing that we're going to send over the cable across a server or for a server, right? So now that I know that, I master that, right? Particularly with this example here on the phone, right? So the second part is to implement a server-side processing for a phone. And to me, it's like, what is this concept here? It's a server-side processing. It's just a fancy way to say, hey, whoever is on the other side of this, whoever is on the other side behind this URL, okay, they need to be able to process this. And traditionally, or the legacy way of doing that is by using now a script written in a particular language, C or Perl, that is going to process that, and using now an Apache server, an application that sits on top of the computer of that remote server, right? And that is going to now detect those incoming requests thanks to the OS. That is going to trigger those events, and now the web framework or the Apache, the web server, can detect, and then it say, all right, let me now, anytime that I receive an incoming connection, let's gonna run this script This is why you have this particular extension known as the CGI, Common Gateway Interface. So this script that live on disk in the remote computers, and one disk is mounted by the OS into memory and executed by the CPU. This is when a process is created. So the idea behind this is one request, one process. And it's this something quite elegant, but also is not as scalable. Because as you can imagine, so you're not only now serving is content to perhaps tens, 1,000s, or a couple thousands of people daily. You are now serving contents across the world, bro. Holy fuck. So if your server has a lot of processes or logical processes, well, that's something good too, right? But if, for example, let's say you have now 4 or 8 or 12 or 16, but if you can see that particular model have a huge bottleneck, because as the incoming requests increase, you have a bottleneck here, and it leads to now so it might leave your user have to wait until the server can process that, and that can take a couple milliseconds or even seconds, or it can be more time than that. So this is why now, for example, is things like the event loop in or this particularly design patterns, where now Node.js is built upon that, and there is a lot of people actually that, especially those that come from C, C++, C Sharp kind of environments, or even Java, right? They don't see the or perhaps they see the benefits, right? But they love to rant, right? But in any case, the idea is that with this particular model of processing this huge amount of incoming requests with high throughput on each one of them, so now this patterns, which is part of the design patterns, right? You have now the design patterns, right? Refactor Guru, right? Which is part of the behavior patterns. Again, this design pattern, which is just a typical solution to common problems, just like that. What is it? What is the common problem that we have here? Is how do you deal with this incoming requests, right? This is part of the behavior here, and on the behavior you have, for example, is the observer here, right? This is quite interesting in order to understand whether we have these particular patterns. So what is the behavior that your application or yeah, that your app is always is constantly dealing with, all right? Or what is the creational patterns that you are currently at as you developing your applications? So singleton is one of them. The other is a prototype, right? It's like you create a copy of existing without making a code depending on their classes, right? The other is a structural. It's like how you can make, for example, two different things, or a structural design pattern explain how to assemble objects and class into large structure while keeping this structure flexures and efficient. Or in other words, you want to extend the functionality of your application, and this is the particular patterns that we have here, right? So each one of those cases, right, whether it's that, what are the different, or what are the different patterns that we have here, especially as we build in this kind of applications, whether it's by creating objects, all right, uh, or by now extending objects, or in other words, by extending the functionality of our system, okay, uh, or by response to to behaviors that are recurring in our applications with algorithms and the assessment of responsibility between objects. So that was a good segue to bring here, because that's exactly what the Node.js at the end of the day has showed to be very, very powerful in this case. So instead of creating one process for that, you're gonna have is several process Node.js applications running in parallel, and they're going to now is, thanks to the OS, notify when an incoming request comes from, and therefore process that at that particular process created. So not only that, it'll allow you to process is all of these incoming requests per process, right? So you're not limited to one process, one request. So you just get rid of this. So you have one process and requests. So yeah. So this is why patterns like, or applications like Node.js has become so powerful. However, um, because the most modern application or most web servers are written in a language that doesn't support this, and I would like to see if this exists. Web server state of the web, right? HTTP, I got the art of the state management. No. Web app has client and server side of understanding web functionality. No. State of the web. Okay. Sample size, total kilobytes, total requests. The number of resource requests by the page. Okay, HTTP requests. HTTPS requests. TCP connection per page. Interesting. HTTP requests. HTTP request to here. So actually evolve that. Interesting. Is now decreasing and is now increasing the support of this, of HTTP 3. That's mind bending. That's a lot. Interesting. Font display. This is maintained by the HTTP or and the HTTP archive. Interesting. Very, very, very interesting. And you have the report, state of the web, state of the JavaScript, JavaScript bytes, the sum of the transfer of kilobyte of all external here. But I think this just describing is accessibility and all that kind of stuff. Bottom name, color contrast, image alt, label. Link name, and all of these are okay. So all of these are analyzing by that. Exactly, those reports are coming from Lighthouse capability. So again, my question was to explore is the server landscape. You know, web server. Let me see if I can real quick help you with that. Web server. Jesus, because I don't want to get too lost into the detail here. Web server frameworks, state of the web. um, the state of JavaScript, the state of the web, but the state of um, ratio of the web. Uh, okay, according to Statista. That's interesting. Um, as 2025, web frameworks among developers. What? No, but I'm talking about is, yeah, this is web frameworks. So, but I'm not looking at web frameworks. I am more interested in server, exactly, server side framework ratio. You know what I mean? Um, no. Most used web frameworks among developers in 2025, but this is base frameworks here. Mm, 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 mm. Okay. W3T Tech, Web Technology Service. Okay. Okay. So according to this website, which is quite interesting, I don't know who maintains that, but it's still relevant from 2009 to 26. Okay. Um, the diagram shows the percentage of website using various server-side programming language. See technologies overview. All right. From this website and the methodology of here. Okay, again, go beyond of today's topics, but this is the current state of the web server, and I find that out very, very interesting. Rather than this, is this. Despite that you have all of this web framework use, right? The web is overly overwhelmed. Is overly so it is heavily used in PHP, but PHP dominate this. PHP dominate this, bro. Ruby and JavaScript, right? And then you have now Java, Scala, ASP.NET, static files, Python, Cold Fusion, and Perl. Okay, so yeah, that's very, very revealing in terms of understanding is the current state of the server-side programming language for website, right? And yeah. Uh, so that actually answer is one question, right? A question that I didn't know that exists, all right, but it opens up now a new question here, all right. Exactly. So what is the okay, what is the problems web servers like Node.js solve compare to traditional web servers like PHP, all right. And what is and the other is the what is the market share of web servers or the language, particularly this one. What is the market share of server-side language? And then you got it. So is this and is this, right? Yeah, as the startup becomes global, resources. So Node.js leverages the I/O, the input and output model, the input and output event model from an existing library called LeafUV that shows to be very effective. So this model is based on the observer design pattern. A design pattern for to solve common problems, or to solve um, or to solve or to come, yeah, a design pattern to solve common problems with common solutions. Exactly. To solve a common problem to a common solution, to a recurrent, to solve a recurring problem with a common solution. With a common solution. So I think that that's quite interesting in terms of understand that. Mm. The reactor pattern. Interesting. An event the multiplex weight on many I/O. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. When the real axis is the concurrency model. Mm-hmm. The whole notion here is the concurrency model here. Mm-hmm. The concurrency model. But in any case, okay. So this is a more elaborated or a more refined question, which is what's the problem web servers using Node.js solve compared to traditional web servers using PHP, and it is all about the concurrency model, the concurrency of handling the concurrency model, right? Or how to handle um, incoming requests, how to handle as much as possible incoming requests, right? Mm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay. 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 Oh. Mm. Mm. Okay. Okay. Um. Mm-hmm. And there you got it. And it's interesting because at the end of the day, PHP and Ruby, it holds the ground. um, PHP and Ruby, bro. You might have all the different web servers and so on and so forth, but PHP and they actually rule the world. Mm-hmm. Okay. So that'll be all again for this video. Take care. Bye bye.